What if I told you that one of the most powerful and rebellious women in ancient history had her story almost wiped from the pages of time? That's right. The tale of a woman who single-handedly took down an empire's mightiest warrior, all in the name of freedom. Sounds like something out of a blockbuster action movie, doesn't it? But this isn't fiction. This is the incredible story of Judith, a woman who defied all odds and became a symbol of resistance and courage. Now imagine a world where her story was forgotten, hidden away in the shadows, almost erased completely. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, and Judith's legacy, her bravery, her daring mission, her unwavering resolve, couldn't stay buried forever. This brings us to something truly captivating: the lost Book of Judith. What makes this so intriguing is that this lost book isn't just some dusty, forgotten scroll. It's a part of our history that reveals so much about the strength of women, the power of defiance, and the triumph of good over overwhelming evil. Judith's tale, with its high stakes and bold action, wasn't just the stuff of legends. It was a lifeline for a people who needed hope. She rose to the occasion when everything seemed lost. Judith wasn't a mere footnote in history. She wasn't some passive observer of the events unfolding around her. No, she was the one who took action. In a world dominated by powerful empires and brutal warriors, Judith stepped up when it seemed like no one else could. She didn't just fight for her own survival. She fought for her people, for freedom, and for what was right. And her story? Well, her story didn't need to be rewritten. It simply needed to be remembered. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the lost narrative of Judith, how her story almost faded into obscurity, and how, against all odds, it managed to shine through the cracks of history. You'll see how one woman's courage, smarts, and unshakable will change the course of events, and how her legacy lives on today, even though the details of her story have been tucked away for centuries. Get ready to learn about the hidden chapters of history and why Judith's story is more than just an ancient myth. It's a testament to the power of resistance, to the fight for freedom, and to the timeless strength of one determined woman. In the ancient world, where empires ruled with iron fists and warriors were the stuff of legend, there was one woman whose name echoed through the halls of history, and her story continues to captivate us today. Judith. She wasn't a princess. She wasn't born into royalty, and yet she became one of the most fearless, strategic, and heroic figures in all of antiquity. Her tale comes to us from the Book of Judith, part of the Apocrypha of the Bible, which means it isn't always included in every version of the Bible, but it's just as powerful nonetheless. Judith's story unfolds in a time when the mighty Assyrian Empire, under the command of the ruthless general Holofernes, began its expansion into the lands of Israel. Holofernes was a man feared by all, a warrior who seemed unstoppable. His forces laid siege to the ancient city of Bethulia, where Judith lived. This was a city on the brink, surrounded by the enemy, and it seemed like all hope was lost. The people of Bethulia were starving, their walls were weakening, and there seemed to be no way out. This is where Judith's journey begins. Now, Judith wasn't some young warrior training in the ways of battle. She was a widow, a woman who had lived through hardship and loss. But she was also no ordinary woman. Intelligent, strong, and possessing an incredible beauty that disarmed even the bravest of men. Judith knew the weight of what was at stake. She could see the suffering of her people, and unlike many who would cower in fear, she decided to take a stand. What makes Judith's decision so powerful is the context. This wasn't just a matter of saving a city or a people from an invading army. This was about standing up to the unstoppable force of an empire. The Assyrian army wasn't some small, local threat. This was the kind of military machine that crushed everything in its path, and no one, absolutely no one, had ever dared to stand up to it in the way Judith was about to. Judith, with her intelligence and beauty, didn't simply want to fight back the Assyrians with brute force. No, she understood that her strength wasn't in the sword or the shield. It was in her mind, her courage, and her ability to outsmart the enemy. She wasn't the typical warrior. She was a woman who understood the power of strategy, who could see through the arrogance of men like Holofernes, and who had the courage to act when everyone else was paralyzed by fear. This, right here, is where Judith's motivation truly shines. She saw her people suffering, and she knew that if she didn't act, everything would be lost. She wasn't waiting around for someone else to take charge. She knew the power she had within herself, and wasn't afraid to use it, despite the fact that, as a widow, she was in a position that society didn't often empower. She made the decision that would change everything, not just for her people, but for the entire fate of Bethulia. Judith's beauty, her intelligence, and her courage were not just the stuff of myth. They were the tools she would use to become the most unlikely of leaders in a time when leadership was dominated by men. She showed the world that leadership didn't require brute strength or traditional power. It required heart, determination, and the willingness to make the tough choices when no one else could. Judith didn't back down from fear. She was ready to face the storm head on. Her motivations were simple but profound: to save her people, to protect her home, and to give them the fighting chance they so desperately needed. Judith wasn't just acting out of a sense of personal duty. She was driven by a higher calling, a sense of justice and a belief that, even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance to turn the tide. And so, with a quiet confidence and an unshakable resolve, Judith embarked on the journey that would see her face one of the greatest military leaders of her time, and ultimately deliver her people from destruction. She had no fear of the consequences, because she knew that in the battle for freedom, sometimes it only takes one person to make the difference. And Judith, she was that person. Imagine for a moment that there's a treasure buried in the past, a hidden story so powerful, so significant, that its loss changes the course of history. This is the mystery of lost books. Over the centuries, countless ancient texts have been either omitted, destroyed, or buried in the sands of time. Some were lost due to political agendas, others because they were seen as too radical or controversial for their time. And then there's Judith. Her story, while known to us through the Book of Judith in the Apocrypha, hints at a much larger, richer narrative that has been all but erased. But why? To understand the mystery of the lost Book of Judith, we have to understand the nature of lost books in history. These aren't just stories or legends. They're ancient texts that were once known but slowly disappeared, either purposefully or by the natural erosion of time. In the case of Judith, there are strong theories that what we know today is just a fragment of her complete tale, one that may have been far more politically radical, more daring, and more challenging to the status quo of the time than we ever imagined. Think about it. Judith, a widow who isn't afraid to outsmart the mighty Holofernes, and who single-handedly takes down an empire's greatest warrior, was undoubtedly seen as a formidable figure. But could it be that her story was too much of a challenge to those in power, both in the ancient world and in the religious communities that came after it? Perhaps Judith's full narrative was considered too politically charged or too uncomfortable for those in control. After all, in an era where women were often seen as subordinate, a story about a woman taking down a military leader and leading her people to victory might have been a little too rebellious for the more patriarchal societies of the time. Some historians and scholars speculate that there could have been an alternative version of Judith's story, one that was far more radical, perhaps one that was stripped of its heroic undertones, or one that made Judith's actions seem more controversial. There could have been details about her role in the political landscape that would have made her seem like a more direct threat to the powers that be. Imagine a story of a woman in ancient times who was seen as a symbol of defiance against oppression. It's not hard to see how such a tale might ruffle feathers, especially if it challenged the male-dominated systems of leadership or authority. But what we do know is that the Book of Judith, as we have it today, is not included in every Bible. In the canonical scriptures, Judith is not considered part of the traditional narrative. Her story is found in the Apocrypha, a collection of texts that some religious traditions accept, while others do not. The difference in how Judith is depicted in these texts gives us a fascinating glimpse into how she was viewed through the lens of history. In the canonical Bible, Judith's story is a powerful one. She's depicted as a heroine, a woman of immense strength and courage, whose faith and intellect ultimately bring victory to her people. She becomes a symbol of righteousness, a woman who does what no one else can. However, in the apocryphal Book of Judith, there's a sense of mystery and daring in her actions that feels even more profound. The Judith in these texts is not simply a religious figure. She is a master of strategy, a woman who is both revered for her beauty and intelligence, and who defies the conventions of her time to become an unlikely savior. There are some interesting differences between these versions of her story and how she was presented in other lost texts. What may have been left out of the canonical versions, details about Judith's deeper motivations, the possible political overtones of her actions, or even the possible inclusion of other figures or events, remains a mystery. It's as if there was a version of Judith's story that the world wasn't quite ready for, one that perhaps questioned the very systems of power that defined those ancient empires. What we're left with, though, are tantalizing glimpses into her character. Judith, as we know her today, is a figure of immense power and importance, but her full story may have been even more complex, and perhaps even more revolutionary than we could ever imagine. And as we peel back the layers of her history, it becomes clear that Judith's legacy was too powerful to be entirely erased. While we may never know everything about her, one thing is for certain: her impact on history and the message of strength and resistance she embodies is anything but lost. There's a moment in history that is so intense, so full of courage and audacity, that it almost feels like it came straight from the pages of a thriller. Imagine this: a small widow, a woman in a time when society didn't expect much from her. walks alone into the heart of the enemy camp, right into the lair of Holofernes, the ruthless Assyrian general. He's the leader of an unstoppable force that has laid waste to everything in his path. And now she's about to face him, alone. Judith wasn't just any woman. She was a force of nature. She entered Holofernes' camp with nothing but a plan, her wit, and her unwavering courage. What's incredible about Judith is that she didn't rush in, sword drawn, ready for an all-out battle. No, she was smarter than that. Judith used her beauty, her charm, and her intelligence to her advantage. She befriended the enemy, gained Holofernes' trust, and made herself indispensable to his campaign. She knew that the key to her success wasn't just brute strength. It was strategy. She played her cards carefully, weaving a story that Holofernes couldn't resist. The enemy general, known for his cunning and ruthlessness, had no idea that he was walking straight into a trap. And then, when the moment came, Judith acted. It was one of the most legendary moments in history. She walked into Holofernes' tent, found him drunk and vulnerable, and with a swift, calculated motion, she decapitated him. In one fell swoop, Judith did what no one thought possible. She brought down the greatest military leader of the age. And she did it with nothing more than her wits and her courage. The symbolism of this act is impossible to overstate. Holofernes, who had crushed every opponent in his path, was now brought low by a woman. This wasn't just a physical act of violence. It was a bold statement of resistance. A woman with nothing but intelligence, bravery, and audacity had taken down the greatest force of military might in the ancient world. It was the ultimate underdog victory. The act of decapitation wasn't just the physical removal of a head. It was the removal of the empire's dominance, the fall of tyranny. Judith's victory was not just a personal triumph. It was a victory for her people, a victory for freedom, and a victory for anyone who dared to challenge oppressive forces. And just like that, everything changed. When Judith presented Holofernes' head to the people of Bethulia, it was a turning point. The Assyrian forces, leaderless and demoralized, had no choice but to retreat. Judith's single act of bravery sent ripples through the entire empire. It was the spark that ignited a fire of resistance, and it was the moment that turned the tide for the Israelites. Her actions didn't just save a city, they saved a nation, and they showed the world that sometimes one person can change the course of history. But Judith's impact didn't end there. She became a symbol of something much bigger, a symbol of resistance, of defiance, of strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Over the centuries, her story has resonated with movements fighting for justice, freedom, and equality. Judith wasn't just a heroine for her time. She became a beacon of hope for generations to come, especially for women. Judith's role as a symbol of female strength, resilience, and empowerment is undeniable. Her story, in its core, challenges the narrative that women in history were passive figures waiting to be saved. Judith took charge of her destiny. She didn't wait for a hero. She became the hero. Her tale became an inspiration to women throughout history who fought against oppression, inequality, and injustice. She wasn't just a warrior in the literal sense. She was a warrior of the spirit, using her intellect and her courage to achieve what others deemed impossible. Fast forward to today, and Judith's story still resonates. You'll see her referenced in literature, in art, and in pop culture, where her narrative continues to inspire modern-day resistance movements. Her story echoes in the struggles of women around the world, from political activism to social justice campaigns. She's been used as a symbol in feminist movements, representing the strength and resilience of women who refuse to be silenced or marginalized. And it's not just about women. Judith's story is about defying the odds, standing up against tyrannical forces, and never backing down from doing what's right. Judith's influence can be seen in the work of artists, writers, and thinkers across centuries. Her depiction in art has been striking and powerful, especially during the Renaissance, where artists like Caravaggio brought the moment of her decapitation to life in stunning detail. Caravaggio's Judith beheading Holofernes is one of the most famous works that captures the dramatic moment with intense emotion and raw power. The painting isn't just about a woman decapitating a man. It's about the overwhelming force of justice, the triumph of good over evil, and the raw emotion of a woman taking matters into her own hands. It's a depiction that has resonated for centuries and continues to inspire awe. But Judith's legacy isn't just confined to religious or artistic contexts. She's a figure who has evolved throughout history, from a biblical heroine to a global symbol of defiance. In secular spaces, she has come to represent the underdog, someone who challenges the system and fights against forces much greater than herself. And with each generation, her image changes slightly, reflecting the needs and struggles of the time. But at her core, Judith remains the same, a symbol of unyielding courage and defiance. Judith's legacy is one of lasting impact. She wasn't just a hero for her time. She's a hero for all time, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of resistance come from the most unexpected places. Whether in the form of an ancient widow taking down a mighty general or a modern woman fighting for her rights, Judith's story proves that power doesn't always come from physical strength. It often comes from intelligence, courage, and the will to make a difference. When we think of lost books in history, we're not just talking about forgotten pages or ancient scrolls gathering dust in a vault. We're talking about entire narratives, ideas and messages that were either intentionally hidden or erased over time. The story of Judith as we know it is already remarkable. Her courage, her wit, her defiance against overwhelming odds. But what if we've only seen a fraction of her story? What if there was more to Judith's tale? Something deeper, something even more controversial that was hidden away, never to be shared with the world. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Judith's story is why her full narrative appears to have been lost. The version we have today, preserved in the Apocrypha, is only a fragment of what might have been a much larger, more complex story. So why was the Book of Judith lost in the first place? To answer this, we need to look at the political and religious climates of the time. During the early Christian and Jewish periods, there was an ongoing battle for control over sacred texts and their interpretations. Religious leaders and empires were very particular about which stories were included in holy scriptures and which were left out. In the case of Judith, her actions and the way she challenges authority may have been seen as too politically radical or too disruptive to the prevailing powers. After all, here was a woman who not only outsmarted the general of one of the world's most powerful empires, but also, in a very real sense, toppled the forces of oppression. Such a bold story could have easily been viewed as a threat to the religious and political establishment, who may have preferred narratives that reinforced more traditional power structures. Theories abound about why Judith's story might have been altered or omitted from the canonical Bible. One possibility is that her victory over Holofernes wasn't just a military triumph. It could have been a direct challenge to the status quo. In a time when male-dominated leadership was the norm, a woman leading a successful revolt against an empire might have been too dangerous to include in widely accepted religious texts. The idea of a woman standing up against overwhelming forces might have threatened the patriarchal values of those in power, leading to her story being marginalized or edited to fit the traditional norms. Religious institutions also had a vested interest in controlling which stories were told. In a period where the development of Christianity was still in its early stages, the inclusion of texts like the Book of Judith might have risked introducing conflicting ideas. If Judith's story had been allowed to flourish, it could have offered a more radical narrative of female empowerment, resistance, and justice, ideas that could challenge not just the Roman Empire, but the religious structures themselves. The suppression of texts like Judith's could have been a way to maintain a more centralized and controlled version of history, one that fit neatly into the narratives that the ruling empires and religious authorities wanted to promote. So, what exactly could have been in the lost version of Judith's story? We can only speculate, but given her daring actions, it's easy to imagine that there may have been a version of her story that was even more revolutionary, one that may have questioned the very nature of power and authority. Perhaps there were more details about how Judith's actions directly threatened the Assyrian Empire. Details that were too politically sensitive to preserve. It's possible that Judith's story was even more outspoken about the corruption and tyranny of the empire, presenting her as not just a defender of her people, but as an active revolutionary who sought to bring down the very system of power that oppressed them. There could have been alternative conclusions, too. Ones that painted Judith as a leader of a movement, not just a hero who acted alone. What if she was portrayed as the beginning of a larger resistance movement, one that inspired a wave of rebellion against oppressive regimes? Imagine a version where Judith's story didn't just stop at the decapitation of Holofernes, but instead led to a broader political and social upheaval, further challenging the empire's hold on power. And what about the details of her character? We've seen Judith depicted as clever, beautiful, and brave. But was there more to her? Perhaps the original version of the Book of Judith included deeper layers to her character, revealing her as a more complex figure, who wasn't just motivated by survival or protection of her people, but was also deeply driven by a personal philosophy of justice, or even vengeance against oppression. The more we consider this, the more it seems possible that the lost version of Judith's story could have been even more radical, more aligned with the ideas of revolution and justice than we've ever known. Ultimately, we'll never know for sure what was left out or changed. What we do know is that Judith's tale, even in its current form, has left an indelible mark on history. Whether or not the full original story was too daring for its time, the fact remains that Judith's legacy endures as a symbol of resistance, defiance, and the power of one individual to stand up against overwhelming forces. Her story continues to inspire, even as we wonder what the lost chapters of her life might have revealed. Judith's story is more than just a piece of ancient history. It's a powerful tale that resonates deeply in our world today. In a time when we're constantly witnessing resistance movements and calls for empowerment, Judith's actions feel more relevant than ever. She wasn't just a passive figure watching the tides of history roll by. She acted. She took charge when no one else could, and she did so with courage, intelligence, and determination, standing up against the most powerful military force of her time. In many ways, Judith's story mirrors the struggles of individuals and communities today who fight against systems of oppression, inequality, and injustice. Think about it. Throughout history, there have been countless examples of people rising up against overwhelming odds. People who, like Judith, refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. Whether it's activists fighting for civil rights, women demanding equal pay, or entire countries rising against dictatorship, the essence of Judith's bravery lives on in these modern-day struggles. What we can take from Judith's story is a reminder that even when it feels like the system is too powerful to challenge, one individual can make a difference. Judith showed that true courage isn't about waiting for others to act. It's about stepping forward, facing fear head-on, and knowing that every small act of defiance can chip away at the wall of tyranny. Her willingness to act, even when everyone around her was paralyzed by fear, teaches us an invaluable lesson. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when we're faced with large, daunting challenges. It's tempting to assume that our individual actions won't matter in the grand scheme of things. But Judith's courage teaches us that sometimes it only takes one person willing to make the first move to spark change. She didn't wait for the perfect moment, nor did she sit back and hope that someone else would save her. Instead, she trusted her instincts, used her intelligence, and believed that her actions, no matter how small they seemed at first, could make a difference. And, in the end, they did. Judith's legacy as a symbol of resistance and empowerment has also transcended time, making its way into modern pop culture. We see echoes of her story in countless movies, books, and even in the heroes we look up to today. Think about the female superheroes who fight powerful adversaries, often against overwhelming odds. Characters like Wonder Woman, Black Widow, or even Rey from Star Wars. These women, much like Judith, are often thrust into circumstances where they must take matters into their own hands, use their unique skills, and stand up against forces much greater than themselves. Whether it's strength, intelligence, or sheer willpower, these characters embody the same defiant spirit that Judith brought to life thousands of years ago. Judith's influence is especially evident in the way she's been represented in stories that center on resistance and fighting for what's right. In many modern superhero stories, we see that women, much like Judith, often serve as the unlikely hero. They aren't just playing a supporting role or waiting for someone to save them. They are the ones taking action. And this is not just fiction. It's a reflection of how women in real life continue to break barriers, challenge oppressive systems, and lead change. In literature and movies, the modern-day Judith is often depicted as a powerful woman who defies expectations, stands up to the establishment, and becomes the hero in her own right. Whether she's fighting literal enemies or challenging societal norms, the themes of defiance, justice, and courage are the same. What's so powerful about Judith's story is that it shows us that resistance doesn't always come from an army or a massive force. Sometimes it starts with one person, a single act of bravery that has the power to shift the course of history. And today, her influence continues to inspire countless individuals to rise up, challenge injustice, and embrace their own strength. In a world where voices are still fighting to be heard, and justice is still something we must actively pursue, Judith's story reminds us that empowerment and resistance are timeless. No matter how overwhelming the forces against us may seem, we all have the capacity to rise, to act, and to make a difference. Judith's story may have originated centuries ago, but its modern implications are clear. Change starts with courage, and courage can take down even the greatest of empires. Judith's story is one of the most powerful and awe-inspiring tales in history. A woman against all odds, outsmarting and ultimately defeating the mighty General Holofernes. With nothing but her intellect, courage, and determination, she single-handedly changed the course of a war, saving her people and becoming a symbol of resistance. Her heroism transcends time, inspiring countless individuals to stand up against injustice, no matter how overwhelming the forces might seem. Today, Judith is more than just a historical figure. She is an enduring symbol of empowerment, resilience, and the power of one person to change the world. But there's still so much we don't know. The mystery of the lost Book of Judith continues to captivate our imagination. What more could we have learned from the full account of her story? Was there a deeper message in her actions? Could the lost chapters of Judith's life have revealed even more radical ideas, more bold resistance, or perhaps insights into the political and social structures of her time? The question lingers, and it invites us to imagine what else we could uncover, not just about Judith, but about the world in which she lived. What if we could find the lost book? What more could we learn from Judith's bravery, her leadership, and her fierce independence? Could we gain new insights into how to confront today's challenges with the same courage she displayed? The mystery of what might have been left out, hidden or forgotten, keeps us intrigued, wondering about the full depth of Judith's legacy. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the lost chapters of Judith's story could still be out there, waiting to be discovered? And how does Judith's story resonate with you today? Is there something in her journey that speaks to the struggles we face in our world now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this ancient yet timeless heroine and what she means for us all.